Let us first have a look at Samuel Beckett's life. He was Irish, he was born in Ireland, in Dublin, into an Anglo-Irish family. He graduated in modern languages, French and Italian, at Dublin Trinity College. Then he worked in Paris as a lecturer at the École Normale. He was influenced by French existentialism, and in particular by Camus and Sartre. He then met the Romanian playwright Eugene Ionesco in Paris. Then he moved back to Ireland and became a teacher at Dublin Trinity College. Then when he was only 25 years old, he decided to lead his life as a vagabond across Europe. Then finally he moved to Paris. Then World War II broke out and he fought in the resistance movement in France. He met Joyce in Paris in 1945. He wrote in 2 languages, as he was a mother tongue English writer, but he knew French very well. When he wrote Waiting for Godot, he did it in French, En attendant Godot, and it was an instant success. It was later translated into English, and he won a Nobel Prize for Literature in 1969. Samuel Beckett, together with Eugene Ionesco, is referred to as the father of the theatre of the absurd. The historical background of absurdism, of the theatre of the absurd, is World War II and its aftermath, which was made worse by the Cold War between the United States and Russia. The aftermath of the atrocities of the Nazi concentration camps and the fact that the Allies used the atomic bomb in Japan. A sense of anguish, helplessness developed among young people. People had become aware that man is capable of any kind of evil, aware of the destructive power of scientific knowledge, the decline of religious faith, and the mistrust in the power of reason caused this new helplessness. And a new sense of disillusionment with economic and social progress had risen. Existentialism saw man trapped in a hostile world. Human life was meaningless, and this created a sense of confusion, of despair and emptiness. The universe was not rational and defied any explanation. The universe was seen as absurd. The main exponent of this philosophical current, that is existentialism, was Jean-Paul Sartre. There was a revival of theatre, of drama in Britain after the Second World War in the 1950s, and this new form of drama showed a general rejection of traditional values. 2 main trends rose in the post-war drama: anger and absurd. Let us deal with the theatre of anger first, the so-called angry young men, who were educated playwrights, coming from a middle class or working class. They generally held left-wing ideas. They generally supported socialism. Formally, they did not create innovative plays because their plays were realistic. They were traditional realistic plays, but they were innovative with regard to content because of this new class consciousness, this left-wing consciousness. They wanted to show the frustration of the younger generation, the frustration of young people who rejected middle-class values and wanted to expose, to show, to denounce their unfair situation. Language was direct, was real, and it was the language used by working-class people. Generally, this theater of anger attacked the establishment, the ruling classes and their values, generally capitalism. The main exponent was John Osborne. His masterpiece was Look Back in Anger. The second form of theater, drama, was the theatre of the absurd, under the influence of Camus and Sartre, that is, the influence of existentialism. The theatre of the absurd is based on the pessimistic view of man's existence. There is no purpose at all in man's life. Man's life is totally absurd. We can easily understand the reason why man's life looks absurd after 2 world wars, in a world with no religion, with no belief. Man is lost. So there's a big existential question. What is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of human existence? If one thing is absurd, it means that it doesn't have any meaning at all. Absurd indicates no meaning at all, no rational meaning at all. Beckett's plays want to represent the absurdity, the irrationality of human existence. To represent this, Beckett created a new form of drama, totally different from traditional realistic drama. Beckett's plays are influenced by existentialism. What are the main themes of Beckett's plays? The sense of man's alienation, the cruelty of human life, the absence or the futility of objectives, the meaninglessness of man's struggle, which is in turn inspired by an essay written by Albert Camus dedicated to the myth of Sisyphus. The theatre of the absurd is not a school, it's just a term, a definition, which we normally apply to a group of dramatists. Eugene Ionesco, who was Romanian, Adamov, who was a Russian playwright, and Samuel Beckett, who is the most representative. They did not create a real school because each worked on their own. Samuel Beckett's masterpiece, Waiting for Godot, was not written in his mother language, that is English, but it was first written in French as En attendant Godot in 1953. It was performed in Paris. Beckett decided to write his play in a foreign language, that is in French, to maintain the language as simple and detached as possible. Then Beckett himself translated this play into English as Waiting for Godot, and this play was performed in London. The general situation of Beckett's plays is that all the characters are trapped in a situation from which they cannot escape. Actually, it's an absurd situation. We can understand the features of an absurd play, of the theatre of the absurd, by considering the differences between a traditional play and an absurd play. In traditional drama, there is a story developing in time. There's a setting in place and time. The society is portrayed through realistic characters, real characters who move, who act in a definite period of time. We exactly understand when and where the action is set, and the audience, spectators, can identify themselves with the characters as they see, they feel that they are real people. On the other hand, Waiting for Godot, which is an example of a theatre of the absurd, has no story, no plot. Nothing ever happens in Waiting for Godot on the stage. The characters speak, but they do not really communicate. They do not really act. They don't do anything. They just talk to fill up their empty time. Sometimes they are quiet, but pauses, silences are as important as words. All they do is quarreling, discussing about nothing. There's nothing real that they talk about. For example, they spend their time putting on and off their boots. Estragon does it all the time. He puts on his boots and then he puts them off. Vladimir puts on his hat and then he puts it off. They just want to fill up their time to avoid silence, because silence indicates emptiness, absurd. If they keep quiet, they realize how absurd, how meaningless their condition is. One big question we can make is about time. In a traditional drama, events follow a chronological order. They are narrated in a chronological way. There is a development, and then a climax, and then a conclusion. In Waiting for Godot, there's no development in time. There is no past. There is no future. And in fact, the characters never remember about their past. And they cannot figure out their future. They cannot imagine what their future will be, because one day is similar to the previous and to the following. They cannot even distinguish between yesterday, today, and tomorrow. There is no beginning, there is no end. It's a sort of eternal nightmare. The first act is almost identical to the second. Let us remember that Waiting for Godot is a two-act play, but there's no difference between the first act and the second. Both end with a young man who tells Vladimir and Estragon that Godot will come the following day. There's always the reference to a following day. There's this constant waiting for something to happen, but it never happens. So that's the absurd, that's the trap in which Vladimir and Estragon, but we may say human beings, are trapped into. what is special, what is unique in the theater of the absurd is that there's no setting in time and place. We already said that there's no today, no yesterday, no tomorrow. So basically, Waiting for Godot, its action can occur anytime. It can be anytime. But it can also be located anywhere, because there's no realistic setting or scenery. Unlike traditional drama, in Waiting for Godot, all we can see is a country road, a bare tree, that is, it can be anywhere, anytime. It is a symbolical setting which reminds us of Expressionism, the fact that, unlike Impressionism, we are given the representation of a state of mind, not of a physical place or a physical time. All we get is a symbolical setting of a state of mind, and in this case it's a state of mind full of desolation, full of despair. Another main feature of the theater of the absurd is characterization. Unlike traditional theater, where we can easily understand the social standing and the historical context in which the action takes place, here we only know the names of the characters. On stage there are two tramps. We only know their names: Estragon, Gogo for short, and Vladimir, Didi. Other two tramps, Pozzo, the boss, and Lucky, the slave, and a boy who announces the arrival of Godot, who never comes, at the end of both acts. Who is Godot? It may recall the idea of God. In French it might be little god, a little god. Or go dot, that is, they want to go, but they do not move, dot. Actually, Beckett never said it was God. But this is what the characters do. They just wait for Godot. It's the main theme of the action, if we can call it an action, because they just wait. Godot may refer to something or someone that could relieve man from this unhappy, miserable, unbearable situation, a sort of messiah. But actually Godot never comes. So Estragon, Vladimir, Pozzo, Lucky are condemned to this eternal condition of misery. In traditional drama, we find realistic characters with their round personalities. They belong to a specific social class. In Waiting for Godot, all we know about the characters is that they are tramps, so there's no defined personality, no social class. They just symbolize an existential situation. Let us consider Didi and Gogo. They are complementary. They represent two different aspects of the same personality, body and mind. Body, Gogo, and mind, Didi. So they need each other. They cannot separate. They cannot part. Vladimir, Didi, that is the one who speaks, is more intellectual, and in fact he always plays with his hat. A hat refers to a head, a brain, a mind, a thinking mind. Estragon, Gogo, reminds us of physical activities, and in fact he has problems with his boots. He is the one who wants to go, to move. He refers to physical activities. he is passionate, he is angry, sleepy, he complains that he is beaten by someone during the night, but we will never really understand if this is true or if it's just a nightmare. Because there's no yesterday, no tomorrow, no today, so it's even difficult to talk about the past. There's another complementary couple, Pozzo and Lucky. Pozzo is the master, the oppressor, the power of the body, although he is blind. Lucky is the power of the mind, but he is the slave. He can only speak and think when he has his hat on. They are complementary. They are linked to each other by a rope. The rope is kept by Pozzo, but in the second act, the role is the opposite. Pozzo is blind and needs Lucky, who has become dumb. So Pozzo and Lucky may remind us of Hegel's master-slave relation. The problem of communication, the problem of using language is central in Waiting for Godot. While in traditional drama, characters speak in order to communicate, they only speak when they have something to say. In Waiting for Godot, all we get is a flux, a stream of incoherent bubbling, incoherent, meaningless puns, gags. So even language becomes absurd, even language loses its meaning. We have many pauses, miming, silences. And when the characters speak, they are often contradicted by the stage directions. For example, when Vladimir says, "Well, shall we go?" and Estragon agrees, "Yes, let's go," they cannot move because there's a stage direction which says they do not move, which can make us think of a sort of deus ex machina who pokes fun at the two Trumps. Maybe this refers to a kind of God who makes fun of man, of humanity. All we try to do is contradicted, is stopped by this cruel God who is unwilling or unable to communicate with us, to help humanity to improve their situation, their existential condition, which is a basic part of the absurd. We need to say just one last thing about style. Waiting for Godot and the theatre of the absurd in general is pervaded by a grotesque humor, that is irony about everything, because everything is meaningless. The theatre of the absurd may be considered as a tragic comedy. It's tragical because the characters would like to commit suicide to put an end to their absurd and desperate situation, but it's also a comedy because there's no tragic end. They fail. They even fail to commit suicide. They cannot escape their existential situation. The tone is tragic and desperate, and what we get is a sort of bitter laugh. And this idea of a bitter laugh takes us to Luigi Pirandello and the theatre of the grotesque. It was a dramatic movement which rose in Italy in 1916. It grew out of Pirandello's concept of umorismo, this painful, this bitter laugh which accompanies the sense of bewilderment at the incongruities at the contradictions, the cruelties of life, such as watching an old lady desperately trying to look as if she were a young lady. It grew out as a reaction against positivism and naturalism, and then it became an extension of the crepuscular movement in poetry.